I've spoken to Frankie, Mrs. Welsh, and the only thing I can surmise is that she's a very disturbed young girl. She seems to be having hallucinations about some creatures she calls the bad things. I'm not sure what they're supposed to be, but they're quite frightening to her. She says that she sees them everywhere, and apparently, even in my office here. Now, a concern that I have right now is how things are at home. Is she getting enough attention and positive reinforcement from both parents? Mrs. Welsh looked bemused and a bit concerned, like he was saying something to her that she hadn't heard before. We work a lot, but she gets plenty of at-home time with both of us, yes. You said something about bad things? I've never heard her mention that before, Doctor. I've seen her being stern with some imaginary friends, but she never said any names or even told me about them. What did she tell you? Is my baby going to be okay? I mean, I thought she was just throwing fits or trying to get attention, she said lightly, her hand fidgeting with the amber pendant around her neck. She was dressed like any normal parent would be. Beige wool sweater accented by a brown suede vest. She wore blue jeans and tan stiletto heels. She looked like the average American mother. Red hair streaking with gray, oval face and fair features. She seemed nervous now, worried about her child. I don't think it's immediate concern, Mrs. Welsh. Right now, I think she just needs a good night's sleep. So what I'm going to do is prescribe some medication for her, and it should ensure that she sleeps through the night. What you'll want to do for her now is make sure that there's no added stress at home for her. She should take one of these every night before bed, and I want to follow up an appointment with her in 2 weeks, he said, trying to be as comforting as he could. To be honest, he never expected to see the child again. He thought that she would get some good rest, and that would be the end of the delusions. He would soon find out how very wrong he was. Come on, sweetheart, just take it. Dr. Anderson said it would make the bad dreams go away. Frankie just batted at her mother's hand, making the pill fly across the room and bounce off the wall. They aren't dreams, and I don't want to take the stupid pill. It won't work. Nobody believes me anyway, Frankie said, hugging her pillow to her chest as she sat up in bed. Sweetie, it's just some bad things in your head because you can't sleep. This will help you, I promise. Why do you think I can't sleep then? She turned her head slowly to ask her mother. And the way she said it was nearly terrifying. Almost like a child possessed. Her mother simply looked at her for a moment. Honey, please just do this for me. It'll make Mommy feel better if you just take the pill, please. Mrs. Welsh stepped across the room and picked up the tiny pill and held it out for Frankie. The child heaved a deep sigh and snatched the pill from her mother and swallowed it before her mother could hand her the small cup of water from the table beside her bed. Mrs. Welsh sighed and ran her hand over Frankie's head, gently before kissing her goodnight. Do you want me to leave the door open? She asked, before leaving the room. Frankie laid down, pulling the covers up to her chin, and replied, Do you think it would make any difference? Adrienne Welsh and her husband Jeffrey were hard-working people living in the upper South Hill of Spokane, Washington. She worked part-time at a law firm doing clerical work for a stuffy, overbearing boss that liked his coffee black and his secretaries quiet. Jeffrey worked full-time at a steel mill, climbing the ladder to upper management and hating every minute of it. Jeffrey worked 2 weekends a month. Adrienne was home with the kids most of the time. The way Frankie had been acting wasn't new, but neither of them could explain it. She was a very sweet and very loving little girl, but over the past few years, she had become quiet and distant. Adrienne donned her nightgown and climbed into bed next to her husband. She began putting lotion on her hands and feet while her husband began to speak. What did the quack have to say? He snickered to her. She sighed. He's not a quack, Jeff. He actually gave me quite a bit of insight into what could be wrong with Frankie. He was very helpful. He sat up in bed and closed the book that he had been reading. Oh, yeah. What did he have to say? He said that she isn't sleeping, and that's what's causing her to act out this way, so he wrote her a prescription for some sleeping medication, and after 2 weeks, he wants to follow up with her. Whoa, wait a minute. Pills? Has he got our kid popping pills? His green eyes flared when he said it. He was furious about the idea. Their son Dane had been on Ritalin for about a year or so after a bout of hyperactivity during school. It made him lethargic and tired. After they took him off of it, he was fine. It's essential this time, Jeff. She has to sleep, and you know as well as I do that she hasn't been. Come on, give this a chance. It might work. After all, we've tried everything else, she assured him. I don't like it. Not one bit, he said sternly. I know, hon. But it's the best shot we've got, she said. He crossed his arms over his chest and nodded. I suppose. Before either of them had fallen asleep, a blood-curdling scream came from the next room. Both of them jumped out of bed and ran as fast as they could up to Frankie. Upon entering her door, they found her on the floor beside her bed, pulling out fistfuls of her hair. Her fingertips were tattered and bloody, and her bed was flipped upside down. She was screaming something at the top of her lungs that they couldn't even understand. She simply kept screaming, Neva Nuri Nikyodata, repeating the same phrase over and over again. Her parents ran to her and held her until finally she became calm. Until she was simply saying, make the whisper stop. Get it out of my head. Make it go away. Nearly catatonic, she rocked back and forth in her mother's arms as her father rubbed her neck and shoulders gently. They just looked at each other. Something had to be done. But what was going on? How could they fix a problem? They didn't even know what the problem was. The next day, they were back at Dr. Anderson's office, explaining to him the episode Frankie had the night before. We gave her the medication you prescribed, but it didn't help. She chewed off the ends of her fingernails, pulled out fistfuls of her own hair, and turned over her own bed. And she was screaming in this strange language, she said, nearly sobbing. And dear God, Anderson replied. He was completely dumbfounded by this. Going to these extremities for attention simply didn't add up. What did she say, Mrs. Welch? Can you remember? Adrienne looked at him, with tears flooding her eyes and running her makeup down her face. I think I can remember, but it was gibberish. It made no sense at all. Just repeat it to me. I may be able to make some sense out of it, Anderson goaded. Jeffrey rolled his eyes and stood. This is nonsense. Our daughter is in serious danger of bringing true harm to herself, and you're talking about what was it that she said? What the hell is wrong with you, man? Sit down, Jeff. Just sit down. Don't you get it? We need help. And right now, he is the best. Adrienne yelled at him through her handkerchief. Jeffrey sat down, never saying another word. She said, Neva Mari nicotine or something like that. I can't really remember exactly what right now, she told him. Anderson's face wore a sudden mask of shock. Color left it almost instantly and completely. Did you hear her say, Ne va muri Nikyodata? He said in almost a whisper. Yes! She nearly jumped out of the chair that she sat in when he said it. What is it? What does that mean? Anderson simply looked at them, puzzled and intrigued at the same time. Has your daughter ever taken a language course? Maybe hung around with some kids that spoke different languages? He asked, hoping that there was another avenue to follow. Well, no. She doesn't have friends outside of Dane and she's only 6. She isn't studying any other languages. Please just tell me what it means. Tell me if it means anything, Adrienne said. Anderson sighed heavily at Frankie's distraught parents, waiting for some answer. Anything that would ease their minds, unfortunately. He couldn't ease their minds, for what he was about to tell them would bring them nothing but confusion and further worry for their precious Frankie. Neva Muri Nikyodata is Romanian. He paused for a moment and wiped the sweat from his brow with his own handkerchief before finishing. It means we will never die.